Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Film Haven Reviews. I'm your host Sawyer as always, and today we are finishing up our 70s neo-noir theme, or as we've come to find out, our 70s anti-detective theme, with the apparently very legacy-oriented noir film Farwell, My Lovely from 1975. I had no idea until after the movie, and I saw some of the relateds in the Amazon. It's on Amazon Prime, by the way, for free, if you have Prime. And I saw some of the relateds. I was like, there's a movie called Marlowe from 2022 with Liam Neeson, and the main character is Philip Marlowe. And then I saw a couple of other noir films, and another one that had Robert Mitchum looking very noir-y, and I was like, what's going on here? So I looked it up, and yeah, Philip Marlowe, private investigator Philip Marlowe, is a very famous film noir character. He's kind of like the best way I can put it is he's like the James Bond of noir films. And it's been played by different actors, like most notably Humphrey Bogart, who's obviously like Maltese Falcon, and as we covered Casablanca, a very famous noir powerhouse actor. He did probably the most well-regarded version of Philip Marlowe in the movie The Big Sleep. Robert Mitchum also reprised the role of Philip Marlowe in '78 for a kind of a remake of The Big Sleep. Didn't do so well. But this movie, on the other hand, was very well done, and we'll get into that in just a second. I definitely feel like this movie was more of a callback, a direct callback to the noir films and of the 40s especially, and I can see why now, because he is literally, Philip Marlowe, played by Robert Mitchum, is literally the James Bond of film noir. So very cool. Let's get into the overview. We got a lot to talk about today, so let's just keep moving. So 8 out of 10. Very good. I mean, it's I liked it better than Night Moves, just slightly. Obviously, we got a 7.5. It's a little bit like I kind of suspected last week. It's a little bit closer to Chinatown, but it has its own thing as well. Very much, though, I think because it's in the shadow of Chinatown, and Chinatown just kind of reinvented things so much, it broke so much ground, that this movie just wasn't quite as groundbreaking. It wasn't quite as precedential. It was not new. It was just done really well, and so still hats off to him for that. I really loved the moody score. It had very much Chinatown vibes. It wasn't as good as Chinatown's, but it was still like, it was more quintessential. Whereas Chinatown kind of at some points did some things that were a little bit updating of the classic noir soundtrack, if you will. But it's still, oh man, we'll talk about it in a little bit, but the moody score was very well done here, and it was very effective. I love the authentic set design. We're definitely going to do a breakdown of that later. It felt very authentic and felt like you were in 1940s, kind of, I wouldn't say Skid Row, but just dingy, seedy streets of LA kind of vibes, which is really nice. And then, just like, I think this is kind of the main crux of this entire theme, is that the protagonist, Philip Marlowe, and Robert Mitchum playing Philip Marlowe was just so well done, and it's just an amazing protagonist. And it's, like I said, it's similar to that Harry Mosby, the way that Gene Hackman was able to act so well within the amazingly written character of Harry Mosby, is kind of has the same vibe here with Mitchum and Marlowe. Where Robert Mitchum plays Philip Marlowe, like with that perfect pairing of actor and character, which I really liked. And then the narrative was good. It's nice and twisty. It's like what you would maybe expect from a nice classic crime mystery thriller with the noir and within the noir genre. And speaking of which, let's get into the narrative. Like I said, there's a lot to talk about, so let's not focus too much on the overview, and let's just get into it. The narrative. Okay. So, once again, I will take this time to say, watch this episode and don't listen to it if you want to actually see some of the clips from the movies. And when I do stuff like this narrative breakdown, you'll be able to see visually all the characters that I'm referencing, and you won't get confused. So go onto my YouTube or on my Spotify. Both of those are going to be in video format. And yeah, those links are going to be in the show notes. So before I get into the narrative, I just wanted to make sure that you guys know that you can watch this episode instead of listening to it. Okay, so Philip Marlowe is a private detective. Imagine that. who's tasked by a lovesick, hulking brute of a man, Moose Malloy, to find his missing girlfriend, Velma, who used to be a nightclub dancer and stopped riding Moose just a year into his 7-year stint in the brig for robbing a bank and making off with $80,000.
The Great Bend bank robbery, 80 grand. I did it solo. Ain't that something?
After shaking down nightclub owners, retired big band musicians, and an aging dancer with a drinking problem, Marlowe finally tracks down Velma in a mental institution, only to find that she's not the real Velma, and his search must start over. Very similar, like in Chinatown, right? We had the Miss Mulray that originally commissioned Jake Gittes to go find if her husband was cheating on him, and then, boom, you find out that she's not the real Miss Mulray. It's been a setup of sorts. Very similar in this film. Once again, it comes a year later, so it's like maybe a little derivative, but I think it's kind of a classic noir thing, honestly, so it's not too crazy. Like in Chinatown, the more Marlowe tries to find his mark, the deeper and wider the rabbit hole becomes, and it's not long before he finds himself neck deep in a pool of nefarious connections and malice corruption. So yeah, it's very similar to Chinatown, where there's like an initial... And like I kind of said with Night Moves as well, there's an initial kind of mark that he's given. He's a private detective, and he's given kind of a simple thing, find my girlfriend. The more he tries to find the girlfriend, the more he figures out that like things are kind of stinky. He even says at one point, things are stinking like fish or something like that. My nose is twitching is what he says. And that kind of makes him feel like there's more to this than what I'm getting into. And I think similar to Jake Gittes, his curiosity about it, because he's such a smart person, but also just like, I think he's listless in life, Jake Gittes being the same way. And this is just excitement, right? Like you just got to figure out what's at the bottom of this hole. I mean, who wouldn't if you really start digging in something and your job, right? You're a private detective. And similarly to Jake Gittes, he was a previous, and which I feel like a lot of private investigators are, previous detective. He worked for the DA. And now, so he's used to investigating things. And so when you're pulling on these threads and they're getting bigger and longer than you were expecting, then you kind of have to do it. You got to figure it out. But similarly to Chinatown, the more he pulls on the thread, the more thread he finds. And also similar is the more trouble he, kind of sticks his nose in, the more he gets hurt, which I thought was a really fun kind of parallel to Chinatown as well. Okay, so let's get into the different aspects that I liked. I think we could break it down by kind of more similarly to Chinatown. Instead of things I liked and didn't like, we're just going to talk about the aspects of the film because I pretty much liked most of it. Cinematography, very competent. It hits all the notes it needs to, and then it has some good lighting moments too. There's a scene where he's like in his office and it's all dark except for this blinking red light. I guess it's on the outside, like through the window, and it's really moody. There's a couple of scenes within this brothel about halfway through that just has some good lighting, very noir-esque like shading and lots of high contrast lighting and stuff like that. And then just in general, the nightlife, like on the opening credits, we see it's not great picture quality, but you kind of see this like retro 40s looking Sunset Boulevard and just the nightlife of LA, lots of neon signs. There's several different instances of neon being used to great effect. Whether it be nightclubs or because illegal gambling areas and stuff like that. It's just it helps set the history, helps set you in the period, but it's also just beautiful to look at. A lot of movies, they have neon moments, and I like a movie to really just give me all the neon, and there's tons in this movie, so I'm really happy with that. The actual opening shot, too, with Marlowe, like pretty much the intro shot of the movie after the title credits, is absolute perfection. We have the camera pans up from the street on him on a window lit by the reflection of a neon sign as he lights a cigarette, and his overlaid soliloquy begins, which is so like, that's when I knew that this was like, oh, this is going to be more classic noir, because like I said, it pans up on him and he's smoking the cigarette, looking listlessly out the window, and you hear the moody score in the background, and then you hear him start talking like, it was a rainy day in May, and it's just kind of very classic noir. I might even just real fast play that clip with the audio so that you can set the tone of what exactly I'm talking about.
This past spring was the first that I felt tired and realized I was growing old. Maybe it was the rotten weather we'd had in L.A. Maybe it was the rotten cases I'd had, mostly chasing a few missing husbands and then chasing their wives once I found them in order to get paid. Or maybe it was just the plain fact that I am tired and growing old.
And so all of that is accented by the moody score, of course, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But within the realm of cinematography, I know they aren't necessarily, one doesn't have all that to do with the other necessarily, but the set design, it really helps the cinematography, because the better your set is, the more beautiful it is, then the better that your shots are going to be. So they are very integral to one another. So that's one of the things I kind of mentioned before. I really like the authenticness of the set design. It feels like a genuine period piece, with all the seedy LA streets feeling authentic, and areas like the Florian nightclub. And then there's an area that you see a lot, the Crescent Hotel. It makes it feel alive and real. And you see the Crescent Hotel at night, you see it during the day, and particularly during the day shot, I really loved the colors on all the buildings that surround it. It's just it's like kind of menagerie of colors. It feels like an art piece, honestly, which I really liked. And obviously it is, because it's a set design. So yeah, these places are so colorful, and it helps the cinematography pop. It makes you really feel enriched visually by looking at it. So I really liked that. And they also do a good job, like in Chinatown, of including the history within the narrative. For example, Marlowe is constantly using Joe DiMaggio's like famous home run record. Like, he's on a streak of home runs. I think it's like 56 in a row or something like that throughout the movie, in his little soliloquies. And even when he talks to the newsstand guy, Georgie, he's always like, they're always referencing Joe DiMaggio and what he's doing. And so it really gives you a time frame for the movie, not just a place in time, but also like as all this stuff is progressing within the mystery and the story, Joe DiMaggio is just going back and hitting home runs. And it's kind of, I feel like Marlowe is somewhat conflating, or not conflating, but making it thematic to his own life. Something about him having a great time while Marlowe is not. Joe DiMaggio doing great stuff. Meanwhile, Marlowe's getting beat up all the time and all this kind of stuff. So I think he kind of is maybe wishful thinking. I wish I was Joe DiMaggio. Maybe that's a stretch. I'm not sure. But also there's a scene where Georgie, the newsstand guy, once again, asks Marlowe what he thinks of Hitler invading Russia. And I'll just play it because it's really funny.
Hey, what do you think of this guy Hitler?
What about him?
He invaded Russia.
So did Napoleon. It's a hell of a lot easier than hitting them 42 straight, right?
Hey.
And then just talking about cinematography, I really liked the editing in this one random scene. This is such a crazy scene. I don't know where else I'd want to talk about this, so we might as well. So about halfway through the movie, it takes a weird turn, and Robert Mitchum, or Philip Marlowe, is investigating, trying to figure out where this Velma, the real Velma, is, and he gets led to this famous brothel led by the Madame Amthor. She's a real big, manly looking woman. And they have like a slap fight. He's being interrogated, and she starts slapping him, and then he slaps her back and makes her bleed. And then she says, "Oh, heck no, I'm going to now inject you with opium." So dope, as they call it. She dopes him up, and during the scene where he's like tripping basically from the dope, it's pretty wacky, especially for 1975 with all the crossfades and the overlays, and it's just like, you had to edit that back in the day. You had to edit that by hand, of course. There's no digital editing, so very impressive in that regard, and it's very just off the wall. And when you have a production that is for the most part pretty standard and traditional, to have something a little wacky like that in the middle, it probably was not easy to do. But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool if we're looking at cinematography, and maybe possibly that's more editing, but still. Okay, moving on with the score. I mentioned the main theme in the opening shot, but there were also some other moments, like specifically when, actually speaking of the scene where he gets doped up after he spends an entire week in a dope den being held against his will, he escapes, and when he's doing that, the score really kind of ratchets up, and you hear this kind of fun, like ominous bum, ba-dum, ba-dum, and then in the background, and the kind of the counter melody or the counter beat, you're hearing this like oboe or a tuba, I can't tell which one, And I really liked that. I thought that was really well made, well composed. And then at the end, there's even more kind of raucous, more climactic, kind of like get ready for the final action of the movie scene where they're getting on this boat. And it's kind of funny too. This movie's a little funny, but it's also funny during that scene where Marlowe the way he puts his arms around the two guys in the boat, and he's just like, I don't know, there's just a little cheek to it, I guess. But yeah, the score was pretty well done. Can't complain. And then there were, I would say it's pretty normal for a noir, but then with a little bit better than maybe above mediocre. Okay, anyway, so the next thing is characters. Let's get into the characters because that's honestly probably the best part of this movie. Same with both the other movies, honestly. Chinatown, the best part of the movie was every part of the movie, but with Night Moves, the character Harry Mosby was the best part. And similarly in this film, Philip Marlowe is he's the best. I mean, he's a very interesting character. What's interesting though is that he's probably the most shallow out of the three. I would say Harry Mosby was the deepest as far as like what you could derive from like his entire character. And I would say Jake Gittes was deep, had a past, all that kind of stuff, but also was entertaining to watch. And I would say Philip Marlowe is the most entertaining to watch, but also the most shallow at the same time. Like he's very funny. He has some great lines like,
I feel like a fly out here.
And then another one later in a Chinese restaurant where he says,
I was having some Chinese food when a dark shadow fell over my chop suey.
And then there's this great scene where he meets up with Moose again after a long time, and he's like being shaken, and he says,
No, wait a minute. I've been slapped, scratched, punched, knocked unconscious, drugged, and shot at looking for you, Velma, so quit trying to make a milkshake out of my insides, will you? Come, stop it!
And really, like I was saying earlier, the entire movie just has a lot of like inherent humor baked into it. Just lots of little things, kind of like Chinatown, where it's just the situation's funny. And then I think Marlowe himself is just like like I just showed you, he has all these little one-liners. His cheek and everything is just kind of it makes a lighter tone. I really like it. It kind of makes just like with Chinatown, even though there are some kind of seedier and darker themes, very realistic movie compared to older noirs, it's still like the humor kind of keeps you in it and engaged without feeling too icky or anything like that, which I really liked. But anyway, back to Marlowe. His morality is one of the interesting parts, maybe the deepest part of him. I was trying to pin it down as I'm writing my notes. I'm like, so he's morally dubious, or is he, or what's going on here? Because he's definitely someone who cares a lot about the money. And there's a lot of scenes, one with a guy named Brunette, where he's basically like, you know, will you do anything, no questions asked? And he says, well, there's always one question. How much?
You ever do a job, no questions asked?
Oh, no. There's always one question.
What's that?
How much?
You know, so it's like, I'll do anything if you pay me. But then, so that's very morally dubious, or maybe just like morally neutral. He kind of gives that vibe. His character himself, as we'll get into in just a little bit, is very unflappable, doesn't emote very much, even though he's got all these great lines. He doesn't always kind of show emotion. And so that's why it's hard to get a beat on what he feels morally. Like at the beginning, when he first talks to Moose and they start investigating what happened to Velma, they're at the Florian, and Moose kills the nightclub owner, and he's a black man, and there's a lot of casual racism in this movie. It's just kind of it's not in the background. It's like they don't mention it as being like, well, that's racist. It's just kind of there, I guess, because it's supposed to be taking place in the 40s. But still, even though Mitchum would later, like his biggest moral kind of compass going in the right direction is his affinity for this young child who is of mixed race. So it doesn't seem like he's actually racist himself. It's more like he doesn't really care if anyone lives or dies for the most part, unless it's kids, is my guess. He just has a soft spot for children, which, I mean, you'd have to be completely morally devoid to not care about children. But yeah, so this nightclub owner dies, and he's just kind of like, yeah, who cares? Like, he's telling the detectives that when they come up when he shows them the body, he's kind of like, well, what do you guys care? It's just a black guy that died. And it's like, whoa, that's rough. But maybe I think possibly it could be him being a little, not sarcastic, but just kind of like, you guys don't care. The LAPD doesn't care. He's a black man. So I guess that's like maybe the point there, is that he's showing them their own racism. He never uses any derogatory terms when talking about African Americans, but there are a lot of derogatory terms said in his presence, and he doesn't seem to mind. Once again, product of its time is it's supposed to be in the 40s, so I guess that they're just trying to be authentic. But there's also just a lot of death around him. People die, and he just, even in the final scene, people are dying. It's just should be a very like, whoa scene, and he just kind of like I don't care. So yeah, his moral compass is very interesting. I don't think it's like the focal point of the film like it is in Night Moves, but it is like something that is interesting to try to pin down. And I think in the end, the whole reason he even says as much, the whole reason why he ends up kind of doing the Harry Mosby thing by deciding to go down the final rabbit hole to stop the bad guy, because he says that the child that he has this affinity for, his father was one of the people that Marlowe was interviewing, and he ended up getting killed by the brunette, the guy he's going after. And so he's basically saying like, I'm going to be haunted for the rest of my life if I don't avenge this child's, murder, because he feels responsible because he kicked the hornet's nest, so to speak. And so, yeah, like the morality is the reason why he's finishing out the movie in a way, or the story. So morality is important, but as to what his actual morality is really interesting. In general, too, like I said, he's just very unflappable. I said he didn't emote much, but like, for example, he gets knocked out twice. He's drugged and kept in a basement for an entire week. He's shot at several times, and yet never seems to have a serious reaction to it. Like, I don't know. It's kind of one of the things that, once again, it kind of adds this humor to it, where it's like, who is this guy? And of course, now I know that he is supposed to be this famous noir detective or investigator, so it kind of makes sense. I'm very kind of in the dark here. I haven't seen any of the other movies that with Philip Marlowe in it, but it is interesting to me. I think his characterization in that way is really great. I mean, one time he's literally just been ambushed by another car that's shooting at him, and he just pulls over and looks like slightly annoyed. Like, that's it. He's just kind of like, man, another one. It was pretty amazing. But the most important thing here, too, is that Mitchum plays him to perfection. I haven't seen a lot of Robert Mitchum movies. A lot of the movies that I've seen with Robert Mitchum is some of his later stuff where he's kind of not the main character. He's just kind of in the movie. I know he's the guy from Cape Fear, and I've seen the Martin Scorsese Cape Fear a couple times, and he's in that as kind of a cameo character. So I'm honestly not very familiar with Robert Mitchum. This is like my first real, like, he's the protagonist of the movie role, and I really enjoy him. I definitely might have to do a Robert Mitchum theme. I've been trying to put his famous movie, The Night of the Hunter, I've been trying to put that movie somewhere in a theme for quite literally 2 or 3 years at this point. So it would be great for me to be able to put that somewhere. So maybe we'll just do a Robert Mitchum. We'll do like the original Cape Fear. We'll do The Night in the Hunter. Who knows? But anyway, I love his voice, his low, monotone, yet comforting voice. Like, it makes all his scenes really easy to watch. And you get the sense that he's like a good PI, even just because like people find him easy to talk to. I mean, his kind of calming demeanor, he just kind of like, shooting the breeze with you a little bit. You kind of just want to open up to him a little bit because he doesn't seem very menacing. He doesn't seem aggressive. He just kind of seems like he's there and he's just hanging out. It seems like he's smart but uninterested, if that makes sense, which is, I think, a really good way to be a private investigator. I mean, that's the kind of demeanor that you probably want. And most of all the other characters are great too. I really liked all the characters. I'm not going to go into all of them because we don't have the time for that, but there is one that I feel like deserves a little bit more credit than he gets even in the movie, and that is Georgie. I mentioned him a couple times. He's the guy that runs the newsstand. And he ends up being Marlowe's go-to guy when things get tough. When he goes into the dope den and is stuck there for a week and he's like struggling, kind of rattling out, where does he go? He goes to Georgie's house, and Georgie takes care of him they kind of like indicate that it's probably days, if not a week or so before, like, of him nursing him back to health. Georgie, like, come on, Georgie's a real one. And then later, when Moose and Marlowe need a place to stay at, like hide out and meet up so that they're not being, followed by the police or the people that are trying to get them, where do they go? Georgie's house. And I'm like, you're really putting Georgie, this guy that you're just friends with at the newsstand, through, like, you're putting him in danger. You feel bad for that kid. What happened to Georgie dies? And then later, Georgie gets interrogated for information and beat up. And you see he's got this black eye that's so big he can't even open his eye. And he's like, and on top of saying, I didn't tell him nothing, he also says, I also got you a boat to go to the final action, like the climax. And it's like, bro, what? Give him some money or something. And Mitchum doesn't. He just kind of is like, he either says thank you or says nothing. It's just kind of like, all right, boy, Georgie. All right, let's move on. And I'm like, dude, Georgie is like the unsung hero of this movie, so we need to give him some more credit. But anyway, so let's go move on to our last thing here. So I wanted to kind of wrap up this entire theme. I wanted to kind of look at the anti-detective idea, because those first two movies, as I talked about last week, Night Moves and Chinatown, they definitely fit this anti-detective kind of sphere. But this movie, it's kind of, I think it's a little bit more traditional. It's definitely the outlier of the three when it comes to the actual concept of being an anti-detective. For example, Marlowe obviously is a very famous investigator from previous movies. Like, he is an actual embodiment of the classic noir. And so for this movie to be a neo-noir, which it is considered one, I think partly it's because it's in color. I think it's because it's just placed in the movie is made in the 70s. And I think too, from what I've read, it seems like the more realistic, because this is a book, like Farwell, My Lovely is a book written by the guy who wrote all these books, very similar to Ian Fleming and James Bond. The books have been turned into movies, and this character is kind of an enduring and recurring legacy character. And so apparently this movie updates that book to be a little bit more realistic. That's why you've got all these like seedy LA scenes, and there's dancers, and there's a brothel, and there's all kinds of things that are a little bit, maybe a little bit more or a little racier than you would have seen in the 40s. And so that kind of makes it a little bit of a neo-noir. But when talking about anti-detective, I would say that Marlowe, while being he's obviously smart. It's like he's more similar to Jake Gittes, where he's like very smart and he is figuring stuff out. But at the same time, he just finds himself getting knocked out several times. And he gets fooled several times. You have the original being fooled by going and finally finding Velma, and turns out that he's been given the wrong picture. So he's been led astray. So he gets fooled. And I mean, he gets fooled in the climax too. I'm not going to get too into it, but I mean, the climactic reveal he did not see coming. So that's also like very unlike Sherlock Holmes, or probably a more classic detective from older movies. So he does kind of fit the anti-detective theme, but I think the biggest thing that kind of moves away is that final scene, speaking of which, because the climax in this movie is much different than the other two, where it's much more of a reveal in the way of like a Matlock episode, or was the Columbo or something, like a classic mystery crime, or like a Agatha Christie detective, was not Clouseau, I think that's Pink Panther. But Perrier or whatever, the guy Kenneth Branagh plays in all the modern Agatha Christie movies. He's always the smart one. He figures it out, and then there's the big reveal at the end where all the truth comes out and the jig is up, so to speak. And there's much more of a scene like that in this at the little boat. They kind of find all the bad guys, and there's one twist, but for the most part, the whole plot gets unraveled, and he actually plays an active role in the situation. He's shooting people. Like, he's not just sitting there being a bystander, where that is very much different. And these other two movies, Night Moves and Chinatown, as we talked about a lot last week, they are just more spectators in their own finale. Whereas in this movie, Marlowe is much more an active participant. So that kind of is, I would say that's the biggest thing that's kind of pushing this away from that anti-detective theme. I think that if you were to call this an anti-detective film, it would be like a very light version of it. It has anti-detective elements, but ultimately it falls back on its traditions. And so I think I would call this more of a classic noir with a neo-noir flair. which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a 70 Metascore and a 7.0 user score, which it's not very often that you see the user and the critics kind of coming together. And exactly. And that's because this movie is just really, it's very well done, but it's also very traditional. Yeah, they updated a few things with some of the more realistic themes and being a little bit more realistic. But what makes this movie so good is that while it is so derivative because it's basically a love letter to classic noir, it's the direction from Dick Richards and then Mitchum's performance as Marlowe. Those things just push this to a new level. So that's why, even though I know that people are giving it 7s and 70s, I think I was going to give it an 8 because those performances and then also some of these other production design stuff. I mean, the production design, the cinematography, the score, all the craft of this movie is just on a level that's a little bit higher than, it's not just throwing in the towel doing a movie that's just like every other. While the base of that is true, it is a movie that is just referencing old noir themes. It is still done so well that you got to say, okay, like this could have been mediocre. This could have been really throwaway, but you made it something interesting to the point where I would say that if someone's looking for a classic noir in color or just a classic noir, I would throw this one their way easy because it's very entertaining. I loved watching it. It was a great movie. It was a fun experience. Solid 7 out of 10 with that. Just putting a whole point in there for just the craft, the directing, and then the acting from Robert Mitchum because he's just fun to watch. So yeah, it's a good quality noir film, and it's kind of a neo-noir film, kind of. And they did use color really well in this movie too. I mean, speaking of neo-noir stuff, like I was talking about with Chinatown, I would say that there's more color, and I would say it's definitely more color in this film than there was in Chinatown. That's one of the reasons too. It's not going to get a 9 out of 10. Like I talked about at the top of the episode, Chinatown just came out like within the year, so it's just like this movie has already been made a little bit. While it is more colorful and there may be some more aspects, I would say, even though Jake Gittes is probably a better character overall, I think that Philip Marlowe is just like a really entertaining character, very highly entertaining. And maybe for on a more casual level, like for a more casual viewer, one that's not looking into it like as deeply as I'm trying to for the episode, I think Philip Marlowe is more fun. So in the end, yeah, there's pluses and minuses. It's just not as groundbreaking as Chinatown is. So 8 out of 10, great score. And I think this has been a really fun theme. I've really enjoyed breaking these down. It's totally opened 2 whole new worlds. One is the anti-detective. I want to look at more anti-detective films. And then now I know all about this Philip Marlowe. There's 12 different Philip Marlowe movies in different iterations. Some of them played by James Caan. And as I said earlier, Liam Neeson. So like some big actors who have played this character. I didn't even know who he was. Just goes to show that film, it just never stops. The more you dig in, much like a private investigator in all these neo-noir films, the more you dig into film, the more the rabbit hole widens and the deeper it goes and the more you figure out that you didn't know that much to begin with. So anyway, I hope you guys have a great week this week. I don't know exactly what theme I'm going to be doing next week. It's going to be, it's up in the air. There's like 5 different things I could do. So we'll just see. But I hope you guys have a great week this week, and I will see you next Friday.